My husband was planning to steal his own mother's house, with the woman he was sleeping with behind my back. I found out 3 days before he was going to make her sign the papers. I didn't scream, I didn't confront him. I smiled. What I did next, they never saw coming. I'm glad you're here. Follow my story until the end. And tell me where you're watching from. I want to know how far this story travels. The afternoon sun filtered through the kitchen blinds, casting thin pillows of light across the marble countertop. I stood there, slicing apples for a pie my husband had specifically requested that morning. "Make it like Mom used to," he'd said, not even looking at me. I remember thinking how strange that was. He hadn't asked for his mother's recipe in years. At 68, I had learned not to question small changes. People shift, habits evolve, or so I told myself. The house was quiet except for the low hum of the refrigerator and the soft ticking of the clock above the doorway. A home we had shared for over 40 years now felt staged. Like I was the only one still living honestly inside it. That was when his phone rang. He had left it on the kitchen island, face down, something he never did. I wasn't trying to pry. I truly wasn't, but the screen lit up, and a name I had never seen before appeared. Lena Red Heart. My hand paused mid-slice. The knife hovered above the apple, catching a sliver of sunlight. I shouldn't have answered, but I did. I didn't say anything, I just listened. Her voice came through soft, familiar, far too comfortable. "Is everything ready for Friday?" she asked. There was a pause, then his voice, calm, confident, not the voice he used with me anymore. "Yeah, the lawyer's booked. She trusts me. I'll get her to sign." My breath caught, but I stayed silent. "And the house?" the woman asked. A quiet chuckle. "It'll be mine by the end of the day. She won't even understand what she's signing." The apple slipped from my hand and rolled across the counter, but I didn't move. "And your wife?" she asked, almost as an afterthought. Another pause. Then he laughed. "She won't suspect a thing." I ended the call. Not because I couldn't listen anymore, but because I had heard enough. I stood there for a long moment, staring at my reflection in the darkened microwave door. The woman looking back at me didn't look surprised. She looked clear. Because in that moment, something inside me shifted. This wasn't just betrayal. This was theft from his own mother, from a woman who still set aside his favorite chair at the dinner table. And from me. I wiped my hands slowly on a dish towel and picked up the apple again. Carefully, deliberately. If he thought I was the kind of woman who would cry, or beg, or make a scene, then he didn't know me at all. And that was going to be his biggest mistake. The next morning felt too normal. Sunlight spilled across the hardwood floors just like it always did. The coffee maker clicked on at exactly 6:30 a.m. The smell of fresh grounds filled the kitchen. Warm and familiar, almost comforting. I followed my routine the way I had for decades. I poured 2 cups of coffee. One for me, one for him. When he walked in, he kissed the top of my head like nothing had changed. "Morning," he said, grabbing his mug. I watched him over the rim of mine. 42 years of marriage, and I realized I had never really studied his face like this before. Not like a stranger, not like someone I needed to understand. He looked relaxed, unbothered, almost pleased with himself. "Big day Friday?" I asked casually, setting the trap with a softness I knew he trusted. He nodded, taking a sip. "Yeah, just helping Mom with some paperwork. She's been talking about downsizing." Downsizing. The word landed quietly between us. His mother, Evelyn, was 78 years old, sharp as ever, still drove herself to church every Sunday, still baked cookies for the neighbors. That house wasn't just a property. It was her life. And he was planning to take it. "I'm glad you're helping her," I said gently. "She trusts you." He smiled at that. "I know," he replied. That smile told me everything. Later that afternoon, I drove over to Evelyn's house. The white porch swing creaked as it always had, swaying slightly in the breeze. Wind chimes sang softly above the doorway. Nothing about this place had changed in over 30 years. Evelyn opened the door before I even knocked. "Well, aren't you a sight?" she said with a warm smile. "Come in, honey." Her voice was steady, her eyes clear. She had no idea. We sat in the living room. The same room where she had once helped me fold baby clothes, where she had held my hand the day I became part of this family. I studied her quietly as she poured us tea. The way her hands moved, steady, precise, the way she set the cups down without hesitation. There was no confusion, no weakness. Just trust. "Is everything all right?" she asked, noticing my silence. I could have told her right then. I could have shattered everything in a single sentence. But I didn't. Not yet. Instead, I smiled. "I just wanted to check on you," I said. "Make sure you're not signing anything you don't understand." She chuckled lightly. "Oh, your husband's been helping me with some things," she said. "He said it would make everything easier." Easier? I nodded slowly, my fingers tightening around the teacup. Of course he did. Driving home, I kept my eyes on the road, but my mind was already moving ahead. This wasn't just about catching him. It wasn't about anger, or revenge. It was about timing. If I told Evelyn now, he would panic, he would change the plan, cover his tracks, find another way. No. I needed him to believe everything was working. I needed him confident. Careless. By the time I pulled into the driveway, the plan had already begun to take shape. I turned off the engine and sat there for a moment, listening to the silence. Then I smiled. Because for the first time since that phone call, I wasn't reacting anymore. I was preparing. 2 days before Friday, everything became clearer. Not because he slipped, but because he got comfortable. He started leaving earlier in the morning, dressing sharper, checking his phone more often, but not hiding it as carefully as before. That confidence, it was new. Dangerous, too. I watched him from across the breakfast table, buttering his toast with the same steady rhythm he'd had for years. "You're busy lately," I said lightly. He shrugged. "Just tying up loose ends." Loose ends. That's what he called his own mother's life. I nodded, as if I understood. But I wasn't listening to his words anymore. I was watching patterns. Timing. Behavior. Because when someone thinks they've already won, they stop being careful. That afternoon, I made a call. Not to a friend, not to a relative. To someone who had known our family longer than anyone else. "Mr. Carter speaking." His voice was older now. Slower, but still precise. "David, it's Margaret," I said. There was a pause, then recognition. "Well, it's been a while." David Carter had handled my father-in-law's estate decades ago. He knew every detail of that house. Every clause, every protection that had been quietly built into the paperwork over the years. "I need to ask you something," I said carefully, "about Evelyn's property." Another pause. Then his tone shifted. "What's going on?" I didn't tell him everything. Not yet. Just enough. "There's a signing scheduled this Friday," I said. "My husband is helping her with documents." Silence stretched on the other end. Then, "Did she request this?" he asked. No. That one word was enough. I could hear papers moving. A drawer opening. "Margaret," he said slowly, "that property isn't simple. Your father-in-law set up protections. Transfers like that can't just happen." I closed my eyes briefly. There it was. The first crack in my husband's perfect plan. "What kind of protections?" I asked. "Conditions, oversight, legal triggers that require independent verification. If someone tries to move ownership without full transparency." He didn't finish the sentence. He didn't need to. "It stops?" I asked quietly. "It backfires," he corrected. That evening, I sat in the living room with the lights off. The house was quiet again, but it didn't feel empty anymore. It felt focused. I replayed everything in my mind. The phone call, his confidence, Evelyn's trust, and now, the legal framework he clearly didn't understand. He thought this was just paperwork. A signature, a quick transfer, a done deal. But he had underestimated something. Not just me. Not just his mother. But the system his own father had put in place, long before any of this began. When he came home that night, he looked at me like always. Casual, certain. "Everything okay?" he asked, loosening his tie. I smiled. Of course. And I meant it. Because now, For the first time since I picked up that phone. I knew exactly how this was going to end. I just needed to let him walk straight into it. It wasn't just one moment that gave him away. It was everything, once I knew where to look. I started noticing the small things first. The way he stopped mentioning his mother unless I brought her up, the way he corrected himself mid-sentence. Like he was editing a story in real time, the way his phone never left his hand when he stepped outside. At night, he would lie beside me, scrolling quietly, the glow of the screen reflecting in his glasses. Sometimes he smiled. Not at me. I didn't ask who he was talking to. I already knew. But what unsettled me the most wasn't the affair. It was how practiced he had become. How natural it all seemed. As if this wasn't something new, but something he had been building for a long time. I found the first real clue the following morning. He had left for work in a hurry, forgetting a folder on the dining table. That alone was unusual. He had always been meticulous with paperwork. The folder was thin, too thin for something as important as a property transfer. I shouldn't have opened it. But I did. Inside were copies, not originals. Draft agreements, notes scribbled in the margins, dates circled in red ink. And one name that appeared more than once. Lena Harper. My fingers rested on the page a moment longer than necessary. There it was. Not just a voice on the phone anymore. A person. A participant. I didn't rush. I didn't panic. I sat down at the table and read everything slowly. Each line. Each detail. And with every page, the picture became clearer. He wasn't just trying to help his mother organize paperwork. He was positioning himself. Changing terms. Simplifying language in ways that would confuse her just enough to trust him. It was careful. Calculated. And almost impressive, in a way that made my stomach turn. I closed the folder and placed it back exactly where I had found it. When he came home that evening, I was in the kitchen again. Same place, same routine. I think you forgot something this morning, I said, nodding toward the table. He froze for half a second. Just half. Then he smiled and picked it up. Oh, yeah, just some work stuff. Work stuff. I nodded. Looks important. Nothing major, he said quickly. Too quickly. That was when I knew. He wasn't just lying. He was used to lying. That night, as I lay in bed beside him, I stared at the ceiling and let the silence settle around us. 42 years. That's how long it had taken for me to see him clearly. Not as my husband, not as the man I built a life with. But as someone capable of quietly taking everything from the people who trusted him most. His mother. And me. I turned slightly, watching his back as he slept. Calm, undisturbed. Certain that Friday would go exactly as planned. I almost admired that confidence. Almost. Because what he didn't know, what he couldn't possibly see yet, was that every step he had taken so far had already led him exactly where I needed him to be. I didn't confront him that night. I didn't even bring up the folder. Instead, I waited. Because timing, I had learned, was everything. The next morning, I called Evelyn again. Would you mind if I came by? I asked, keeping my voice light. Of course not, dear, she said. I was just about to make some tea. When I arrived, the house felt the same as always. Warm, quiet, safe. It made what I was about to do feel heavier than anything I'd carried in years. We sat in her kitchen this time, sunlight pouring in through the window above the sink. She placed a cup in front of me, her hands steady as ever. You've been visiting more lately, she said with a gentle smile. I like that. I smiled back. So do I. There was a pause. Not uncomfortable, just waiting. I looked at her, really looked this time, at the lines on her face, the softness in her eyes. A woman who had spent her entire life trusting the people she loved. And I realized something. If I said nothing, I would be just like him. Evelyn, I said quietly, setting my cup down, has my husband asked you to sign anything recently? She blinked, slightly surprised by the question. Well, yes, she said slowly, some documents about the house. He said it would make things easier down the road. Down the road. I nodded. Did you understand everything in those papers? She hesitated. That was enough. "I'd trust him," she said, almost defensively. "He's my son." The words hung in the air. Heavy. Fragile. I leaned forward slightly, keeping my voice calm. "I know," I said, "and that's exactly why I need you to listen to me very carefully." I didn't rush. I didn't overwhelm her. I told her just enough. About the phone call, about the plan, about the signing on Friday. Not every detail, but enough for the truth to settle in. At first, she didn't react. She just sat there, her hands folded in her lap. Then slowly, her expression changed. Not into anger. Not into panic. But into something quieter. Something deeper. Understanding. "He wouldn't do that," she said at first. Then softer. "Would he?" I didn't answer right away. I didn't need to. Because she already knew. The silence between us stretched long and still. Then she reached for her teacup, but her hand stopped halfway. "What do we do?" she asked. Not "what should I do?" What do we do? That was the moment everything shifted. I leaned back slightly, exhaling slowly. Now, we were no longer reacting. We were deciding. "We don't stop him," I said. Her eyes lifted to meet mine. "We let him continue," I added, "exactly the way he planned." A flicker of confusion crossed her face. "Why would we do that?" "Because if we stop him now," I said gently, "he'll change the plan, he'll cover his tracks, and we'll never know how far he was willing to go." She studied me carefully. And for the first time, she didn't see me as just her daughter-in-law. She saw me as something else. Someone who understood what needed to be done. "And if we let him go through with it?" she asked. I held her gaze. "Then we make sure," I said quietly, "that when he does, he walks straight into something he can't walk back from." The room fell silent again. But this time, it wasn't heavy. It was deliberate. And when Evelyn finally nodded, it wasn't out of fear. It was agreement. We didn't rush into anything. In fact, the next step looked almost ordinary. Evelyn and I sat at her kitchen table the following morning, not as victims, but as two women reviewing options. I had asked her to gather every document related to the house. Deeds, old contracts, letters from when her husband first purchased the property decades ago. She kept everything, neatly organized in a worn leather box she pulled from the hallway closet. "I never thought I'd need to look at these again," she said quietly, placing it on the table. I opened it carefully. Inside wasn't just paperwork. It was history. We spent nearly 2 hours going through everything. Page by page. Date by date. And slowly, a pattern began to emerge. Evelyn's late husband had been meticulous. More than that, he had been protective. There were clauses, conditions, signatures from years ago that tied the property to very specific rules. Rules that couldn't be undone with a simple signature. Not without oversight. Not without witnesses who weren't involved. "He always said this house was for family," Evelyn murmured, tracing a line of text with her finger. "But I didn't realize he meant like this." I nodded. He was making sure it stayed that way. That was when I made the second call. Not from my phone. From Evelyn's. "Mr. Carter," she said when he answered. "It's Evelyn." There was a pause, longer this time. "Evelyn, it's been a while," he replied. "I need you here," she said simply. No explanations. No details. Just a request. And that was enough. By the afternoon, everything had shifted. Quietly. Precisely. Mr. Carter confirmed what we already suspected. Any transfer of that property required an independent legal review. A secondary authorization. And, most importantly, a verification that Evelyn fully understood what she was signing. If any of those conditions failed, the transfer wouldn't just stop. It would trigger a review. One that would expose everything. That was when the plan became real. Not just an idea. Not just a reaction. A structure. "We let him bring the papers," I said, looking at Evelyn across the table. "We let him explain them the way he planned." She nodded slowly. "And then?" I held her gaze. "Then we let the right people ask the right questions." There was one more step. The most important one. Evelyn leaned back slightly, her expression calmer than I had ever seen it. "What do you need me to do?" she asked. Not afraid. Not uncertain. Ready. I slid one of the documents toward her. "Nothing different," I said, "that's the key." She frowned slightly. "Act the same. Trust him. Don't challenge anything. Not yet." She studied me for a moment. Then something in her expression changed. Not into suspicion, but into resolve. "You've thought this through," she said. I didn't answer. Because I had. That evening, when I returned home, my husband was already there. Sitting in his usual chair. Watching television like any other night. He looked up as I walked in. "Everything okay?" he asked. I set my purse down slowly. "Everything's fine," I said. And this time, it wasn't just a response. It was the truth. Because he had no idea what was already in motion. No idea that every step he was taking toward Friday was leading him exactly where we wanted him. And this time, he wasn't the one in control anymore. By Wednesday, he stopped pretending. Not completely. But enough for me to see who he really was becoming. He started calling Evelyn more often. Checking in. Offering to help. His tone was softer than usual, almost rehearsed. I overheard one of the calls while standing in the hallway. "You don't need to worry about anything, Mom," he said gently. "I'll handle all of it. Just bring your ID on Friday." Bring your ID. That was the only part that mattered. That evening, he brought it up at dinner. Casually. Like it was just another errand. "Hey," he said, cutting into his steak, "I'm taking Mom to finalize some paperwork this Friday. Shouldn't take long." I nodded, keeping my expression neutral. "That's good," I said. "She'll feel better having everything in order." He glanced at me briefly. Measuring. Waiting. But I gave him nothing. Inside, I was watching everything. Every word. Every pause. Every adjustment he made to the story. Because by now, it wasn't just about what he was doing. It was about how far he was willing to go. The next morning, Evelyn called me. Her voice was steady. But different. I spoke to him, she said. "And?" He explained the documents again. Slowly this time. I leaned against the kitchen counter, listening. "And did it make sense?" I asked. There was a pause. "No," she said quietly. "But he made it sound like it did." I closed my eyes for a moment. That was exactly what we expected. "He wants me to meet him at the office at 10 a.m. on Friday." She continued. "He said everything will be ready." "Good," I said. "Good." The word felt strange in my mouth. But it was the truth. That afternoon, I met with Mr. Carter again. Not in his office this time. In a smaller conference room, away from the front desk. More private. More controlled. He had already reviewed everything. Every document. Every clause. "They're using simplified copies," he said, sliding a paper across the table. "Not illegal, but misleading." I nodded. "And Friday?" He leaned back slightly. "If they try to proceed without full disclosure, I'll be there." There it was. The final piece. When I got home that evening, my husband was in the living room again. Same chair. Same routine. Same man. But I didn't see him the same way anymore. "How was your day?" he asked. "Quiet," I said. He nodded, satisfied with that answer. Always satisfied with simple answers. Later that night, as he slept beside me, I stared at the ceiling once more. Friday was close now. Everything was in place. Evelyn knew her role. Mr. Carter was ready. And my husband? He believed he was walking into a victory. I turned my head slightly, looking at him in the dark. His breathing was even. Peaceful. Certain. For a moment, I wondered if he had ever considered what would happen if things didn't go his way. If he had imagined the possibility of losing everything in a single moment. Then I let the thought go. Because it didn't matter what he imagined. Only what was real. And the truth was, by the time Friday arrived, there would be no more pretending. No more quiet observations. No more waiting. Only consequences. By Thursday night, everything was ready. Not just on our side. On his. 2. He came home earlier than usual that evening. Dressed sharper, more composed, like a man preparing for something important. He even brought wine. "I thought we could relax tonight," he said, setting the bottle on the counter. Relax. The word almost made me smile. We sat together in the living room, glasses in hand, the soft glow of the television flickering across the walls. For a moment, it looked like any other night. 42 years of routine. Comfort. Familiarity. But underneath it, something else was moving. "You've been quiet lately," he said, glancing at me. I took a slow sip of wine. "Just thinking," I replied. "About what?" I met his eyes briefly. "About how things change." He chuckled lightly. "Yeah, they do." He had no idea how true that was. Later that night, his phone buzzed again. He didn't leave the room this time. Didn't even bother to step outside. Just turned slightly away from me and answered. "Yeah," he said quietly. "Tomorrow, 10 o'clock, everything's lined up." A pause. Then, "She won't question anything." I didn't move. Didn't react. Just sat there, listening. The next morning, I woke up before him. The house was still. Silent in a way that felt deliberate. I moved through the kitchen slowly, making coffee, setting things in place. Not because I needed to, but because routine kept everything steady. Grounded. At 8:30 a.m., Evelyn called. "I'm ready," she said. Her voice was calm. Stronger than I had ever heard it. "Good," I replied. "Just remember, nothing changes." "I know," she said. "I trust you." That word again. Trust. This time, placed in the right hands. By 9:15, he was dressed and ready. Checking his watch. Adjusting his tie. Moving with quiet confidence. "I'll pick Mom up on the way," he said, grabbing his keys. I nodded. "Drive safe." He paused at the door, turning back for a moment. There was something in his expression. Not suspicion. Not doubt. Just anticipation. Like he was already imagining the outcome. "I won't be long," he added. "I know," I said. And I did. When the door closed behind him, the house fell silent again. But this time, it wasn't empty. It was waiting. I didn't follow him right away. That wasn't my role. Not yet. Instead, I sat down at the kitchen table and folded my hands in front of me. Every detail had been set. Every step accounted for. There was nothing left to adjust. Nothing left to fix. All that remained was for him to walk into it. At exactly 9:58 a.m., my phone vibrated. A message from Mr. Carter. "We're in position." I looked at the screen for a moment. Then placed the phone down gently. For 42 years, I had shared a life with that man. Built a home. Trusted him. Believed in who he was. And now, I was about to watch him reveal exactly who he had become. I stood up slowly, reached for my coat, and headed toward the door. Because the final act was about to begin. By the time I walked into the office, he was already smiling. The conference room was exactly what you'd expect. Clean, quiet, polished wood table, a stack of documents neatly arranged in the center. Evelyn sat on one side. My husband stood beside her, one hand resting lightly on the back of her chair. Confident. In control. Across from them, Lena. So that was her. Younger than I expected, well-dressed, composed, the kind of woman who knew how to stay quiet until the moment she needed to speak. And at the far end of the table, Mr. Carter. Calm, observing, waiting. My husband looked up when I entered. For a split second, something flickered across his face. Surprise. Then it disappeared. "Margaret," he said, forcing a smile, "I didn't know you were coming." "I thought I should be here," I replied simply, taking a seat beside Evelyn. Lena's eyes moved toward me briefly. Curious. Measuring. Then she looked away. "All right," my husband said, clearing his throat, "let's go over everything one more time." He picked up the top document. "This is just a standard transfer," he explained, his voice smooth. "It'll make managing the property easier. Less stress for you, Mom." Evelyn nodded slowly. Just as we had planned. And you're sure I don't need to worry about anything? She asked softly. Of course not, he said quickly. I've handled everything. Handled everything. He slid the paper toward her. Just sign here, he added, pointing to the bottom line. The room went quiet. Still. Waiting. Evelyn reached for the pen. Her hand hovered for just a moment. Then, before she signs, Mr. Carter's voice cut in, calm but firm. I'd like to review a few details. My husband froze. Only for a second. Then he smiled again. Of course, he said, but everything's already been prepared. I'm sure it has, Mr. Carter replied, adjusting his glasses, but given the nature of this property, we are required to confirm full understanding. Lena shifted slightly in her seat. Subtle. But I saw it. Mr. Carter picked up the document and scanned it slowly. Page by page. Line by line. The silence stretched longer than my husband expected. I could see it in the way his fingers tapped lightly against the table. In the way his smile began to tighten. Interesting, Mr. Carter said finally. My husband leaned forward. What is? He looked up. This version of the document simplifies several key clauses. That's intentional, my husband said quickly, to make it easier for her to understand. Mr. Carter nodded. Easier, or less transparent? The air shifted. Evelyn lowered the pen. Slowly. Deliberately. I don't think I understand this as well as I thought, she said. My husband turned to her immediately. Mom, it's fine, I explained everything. No, she said quietly. And that one word changed everything. He stared at her. Then at me. And for the first time, he wasn't in control anymore. Mr. Carter placed the document back on the table. Given the discrepancies, he said, we'll need to pause this process. Pause? My husband repeated. Yes, Mr. Carter said calmly, until all conditions are properly met. Lena's composure cracked just slightly. A glance. A shift in posture. The first sign of something slipping. I folded my hands in front of me. Said nothing. Because this wasn't the moment to speak. Not yet. My husband looked between all of us now. Trying to understand. Trying to recover. But it was already too late. Because this wasn't just a delay. It was the beginning of the end. And he could feel it. Even if he didn't fully understand why. Not yet. That was the moment he realized something was wrong. Not completely. Not clearly. But enough. What do you mean, pause? He asked. His voice tightening just slightly. Mr. Carter didn't rush his answer. He adjusted the document in front of him. Calm, precise. I mean, he said, that this transfer cannot proceed under the current conditions. My husband let out a short breath, forcing a small laugh. There must be some misunderstanding, he said. Everything was prepared exactly as required. Lena leaned forward slightly. Yes, she added, her tone controlled. We've reviewed everything carefully. We. That word hung in the air longer than she intended. Mr. Carter's eyes shifted briefly toward her, then back to the papers. I'm sure you did, he said, but the issue isn't preparation. He tapped the page lightly. It's intent. The room went still. My client, he continued, nodding toward Evelyn, must fully understand the nature of this transfer. Not a simplified version, not an interpretation. Evelyn sat quietly beside me. Composed. Steady. Exactly as we had planned. I'd like to hear it again, she said softly, in plain terms. My husband turned to her quickly. Mom, I already explained. No, she said. That same quiet firmness. I want him to explain it. She gestured toward Mr. Carter. For the first time, my husband hesitated. A real hesitation. Not just a pause. A crack. Mr. Carter folded his hands. Very well, he said, in plain terms, this document transfers full ownership of your home away from you. Silence. Thick, heavy. Unavoidable. Evelyn didn't react immediately. She simply looked at the paper. Then at her son. Is that true? She asked. He opened his mouth. Closed it. Then. It's more complicated than that, he said quickly. "It ensures long-term stability." "For who?" she asked. Lena shifted again, this time less subtle. "This is being taken out of context," she said. But her voice didn't carry the same confidence anymore. I watched quietly. Hands folded. Heart steady. Because this was the moment everything turned. Mr. Carter spoke again, his tone unchanged. "There's more," he said. My husband's head snapped toward him. "What more?" He slid another document onto the table. One my husband hadn't brought. One he hadn't planned for. "This property," Mr. Carter continued, "is protected under a legal structure established years ago." My husband frowned. "What does that have to do with anything?" "It means," Mr. Carter said calmly, "that any attempt to transfer ownership without full disclosure triggers a review." A pause. Then, a full audit. Lena's composure broke first. "An audit?" she repeated. My husband turned to her sharply. "What is he talking about?" But she didn't answer. Because she didn't know. I finally spoke. Not loudly. Not emotionally. Just enough. "It means," I said, "this wasn't just a signature." Both of them turned toward me. For the first time. Really looking. "It means," I continued, "that everything tied to this transfer gets examined." I let the words settle. All accounts, all communications, all parties involved. The silence that followed was different now. Not tense. Not uncertain. Final. My husband leaned back slowly. The confidence gone. Replaced by something else. Something colder. "Margaret," he said carefully. But I didn't respond. I didn't need to. Because at that point, there was nothing left for him to control. Nothing left to explain. He had walked in believing he was taking everything. And now, he was about to lose it all. The fallout didn't happen all at once. It started quietly. No one spoke for a long moment after that. The room, once filled with confidence and control, now felt smaller. Tighter. My husband sat back in his chair, his hands resting flat against the table as if he needed something solid to hold onto. "This is unnecessary," he said finally, his voice lower now. "We can resolve this without making it complicated." Complicated. I almost smiled. Mr. Carter didn't respond right away. He simply gathered the documents, aligning them neatly, as though the outcome had already been decided. "It's already complicated," he said calmly. "We're just acknowledging it." Lena stood up first. Abruptly. "I think we should step outside and talk," she said, looking directly at my husband. Not at Evelyn. Not at me. Just him. But Evelyn spoke before he could move. "No," she said. One word. Soft. Final. They both turned toward her. "I think we've talked enough," she continued, her hands now resting calmly in her lap. "At least, you have." There was no anger in her voice. No accusation. Just clarity. My husband leaned forward slightly. "Mom," he said, softer now, "this isn't what it looks like." Evelyn tilted her head just a fraction. "Then tell me," she said, "what does it look like?" He opened his mouth. Paused. Looked at Lena. Then back at Evelyn. But no answer came. Because there wasn't one. Not one that could survive the truth sitting on that table. Mr. Carter cleared his throat lightly. "Given the circumstances," he said, "I'll be advising my client to suspend any further discussions regarding this property." Suspend. Another quiet word. Another closed door. Lena exhaled sharply. "This is ridiculous," she muttered, gathering her things. "We're wasting time." She didn't wait for a response. She walked out. Just like that. No explanation. No defense. My husband watched her go. And for the first time, he looked uncertain. Not angry. Not defensive. Just unsure. "Sit down," Evelyn said gently. He hesitated. Then slowly, he sat. "I raised you better than this," she said. No raised voice. No tears. Just a sentence that carried more weight than anything else in that room. He looked down at his hands. "I was trying to help," he said quietly. Evelyn nodded. I'm sure you believe that. A pause. But help doesn't hide things. Silence settled again. But this time, it wasn't tense. It was ending. I stood up slowly. There was nothing more for me to say. Nothing left to reveal. Everything that needed to be seen had already been seen. As I reached for my coat, my husband finally looked at me. "Margaret," he said. My name, softer now. Careful. Almost unfamiliar. I paused. Just for a second. Then I met his eyes. Calm. Steady. Clear. "I didn't stop you," I said quietly. His expression shifted. Confusion. Realization. "I let you continue," I added. And in that moment, he understood. Not everything. But enough. Because the man who had walked into that room thinking he was in control was no longer the same man sitting there now. And whatever came next, he would have to face it. Without us. A week later, the house was quiet again. But not the same kind of quiet. I was sitting in Evelyn's living room, the afternoon light stretching across the floor just like it had the day I first came here years ago. Only now, everything felt different. Not broken. Not empty. Just settled. She was in the kitchen, humming softly as she made tea. The same woman. The same house. But there was something new in the way she moved. Not lighter. Stronger. "They've stopped calling," she said as she walked in, placing a cup in front of me. I nodded. I expected that. She sat across from me, her hands wrapped around the porcelain cup. "For a moment," she said slowly, "I thought I had lost my son." I didn't interrupt. Because I understood what she meant. "And maybe I did," she added, "just not in the way I imagined." We sat there in silence for a while. Not uncomfortable. Just honest. The investigation had already begun. Quietly. Thoroughly. There were questions now. About documents. About intent. About decisions that had been made behind closed doors. I didn't follow every detail. I didn't need to. Because the outcome had already taken shape. He didn't come back to the house. Not mine. Not hers. And Lena. She disappeared even faster. I heard, through someone else, that things between them didn't last. That once everything became complicated. She walked away. Just like she had walked out of that room. I wasn't surprised. People like that rarely stay when there's nothing left to gain. As for me, I didn't feel victorious. Not the way people might expect. There was no celebration. No sense of winning. Just clarity. I had spent 42 years building a life with a man I thought I knew. A man I trusted. A man I believed would protect the people who loved him. I was wrong. But I wasn't powerless. And that made all the difference. "I'm glad you told me," Evelyn said quietly. I looked up at her. "Me too." She reached across the table and placed her hand over mine. Not as a mother-in-law. Not even as family by obligation. But as someone who had stood beside me, and chosen to see the truth. "We'll be all right," she said. And for the first time, I believed it. That evening, I returned to my own house. The same walls. The same furniture. The same memories. But I didn't feel like I was standing inside someone else's life anymore. I opened the windows. Let the air move through the rooms. Let the silence shift into something lighter. Because sometimes, losing what you thought you had is the only way to see what was really there. He thought he was taking everything. The house. The control. The future. But in the end, he lost the only things that ever truly belonged to him. Trust. Family. And the quiet certainty of being seen as someone worth believing in. And me? I didn't need to take anything back. I just stopped giving it away. If you've ever been in a place where something didn't feel right, where silence felt heavier than words, trust that feeling. It sees more than we allow ourselves to admit. Thank you for staying with me until the end. And tell me, where are you watching from?